y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is going to be an episode of It Came From The Network. And if you're not familiar with It Came From The Network, this is where we review the weird, the wild, the campy, and sometimes just downright bad stuff you can find on the WWE Network. This episode, we're going to review the AWA Team Challenge Series pilot that's recently been added to the Hidden Gems category. If you're not familiar with this, a little bit of a backstory. This was the dying days of the AWA, and basically they split their roster into three teams. Team Slaughter, which was led by Sgt Slaughter, Team Larry Zbyszko, and Team Baron Von Raschke. Three of the big stars of the AWA. And each team would get points from wrestlers on their team winning their matches or winning some weird challenges that you would see later on in it. But this is a pilot kind of that they were trying to shop around as a new show with a new format, and we're going to jump right into it. The first match of the show, we have Tommy Jammer versus Tom Burton. And it's obvious why you see I would think Tim Burton, it's a famous director, but this is basically your general era-appropriate squash match. Tommy Jammer picks up the win. I'm going to give this one 1 out of 5, 1 being everything's rated on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. This match, to me, I know what they were doing. They were trying to find a new star with Tommy Jammer, and he had a look and he had a physique to him, but he didn't quite make up to it in the ring. And I don't know whatever happened to him, but he didn't do much after the AWA as far as I know. But they were trying to throw stuff at the wall and see what stuck, and unfortunately this kind of fell flat to me. Next up we have a promo with Baron Von Raschke and Sgt Slaughter. Basically Baron Von Raschke's talking up his guy Paul Diamond, and Sgt Slaughter's talking up his guy Colonel DeBeers, who he hates, but he put on his team because he knew that he's going to win by any means necessary. They're going to be in a King of the Mountain match later on, which is won by the winner throwing the other over the top rope. And Sgt Slaughter gave the reasoning that Colonel DeBeers is willing to cheat and win by any means necessary because he's done it to him and he's thrown him over the ropes, which is why he picked him for this match, which is kind of interesting that they talk about a strategy here, which is kind of cool. Two guys that I think are really strong on a promo, so they absolutely lit it on fire. And then it went from that to the Destruction Crew promo. And Destruction Crew is one of those teams that's Mean Mike Enos and Wayne the Train Bloom. Later they would go on to be the Beverly Brothers in WWE. And then, famously Mike Enos is in the ring when Scott Hall debuts for the NWO gimmick. But I really liked this team as a kid, and I never understood why they never took that next step. They were a really good tag team. They worked really well together. I think the Beverly Brothers gimmick wasn't a perfect fit for them. They should have been kept as more what they were here, which is kind of a Road Warrior type gimmick where they were just big, brutish men that beat people up. I like this gimmick. I like the Destruction Crew, they're construction workers that came off the street to wrestle. They cut a really good promo here with, and we're going to talk about a lot of the green screen stuff when I do the recap. There's a green screen in the background of most of the stuff, and they have like a building being demolished, and it just kind of fit and it worked. I really enjoyed this. It led us into a match where the Destruction Crew this is another squash match, and they're wrestling Ricky Rice and Jerry Lynn. And if that sounds familiar, it is because it is the same Jerry Lynn, the same hardcore icon that we would know as a ECW champion, TNA X Division champion, and Ring of Honor champion later. So a legendary wrestler in a role of a jobber here. And it's kind of neat when you find these. You can find stuff like this. The network has a lot of this. You can see Big Boss Man before he was Big Bubba Rogers as a jobber. You could see different guys, King when he was a jobber on WCW, Edge is a jobber on WCW, different guys, the Hardy Boys, of course, before they became famous, before they really caught on. And this is really cool to see Jerry Lynn this early in his career. I liked this match. I thought it was a better squash match. The two jobber team basically put up more of a fight. However, it still showed the Destruction Crew's dominance. The Destruction Crew picked up the win with a Doomsday device, which they did behind the ref's back because you couldn't come off the top rope in the end of, AWA at this time. I'm going to give this match a 3 out of 5. I thought it was good. It was a good example of why these guys should win. Afterwards, we get frosty tip, blonde-haired, highlighted Eric Bischoff interviewing the Destruction Crew and their manager, Luscious Johnny V. And this, again, it's a really good interview. I don't understand why the Destruction Crew never went and done more. Never went to, be something in WCW or WWE. Again, I do think it's the Beverly Brothers that killed them, but they were a strong enough team that somebody should have took notice and went, hey, we could use these guys for something. And I liked them. I still, to this day, find their matches entertaining, so I don't understand why it never connected. Afterwards, we get a Sgt Slaughter, Colonel DeBeers promo where they're obviously in two different places, but they're trying to edit it in a way that they're not. Basically, Slaughter trying to give marching order to Colonel DeBeers, which is kind of funny, because a colonel outranks a sergeant, even though they're in different armies, but we would see later on and later in the Team Challenge Series where when Slaughter left to go back to WWE, WWF at the time, DeBeers would take over the leadership role. So it's kind of interesting knowing that, watching this. And basically Slaughter's trying to tell him what he needs him to do, and DeBeers is saying, I'm going to do what I want to. Standard for the course. Colonel DeBeers is another guy, much like the Destruction Crew, that I don't know why didn't do more. I know there's a lot of stuff and a lot of hatred to him for some of the racist aspects of his character and some of the things that he did, but I think that was just a character. I don't think the man himself was racist. I really don't know enough to know if he was, and I'm wrong. Leave it in the comments down here, and maybe that's why. But he portrayed someone from the South African army, which at the time was going through a really strong civil rights movement, and he played on the side of the oppressors, which explains why there's a lot of racist connotation to him. But I digress. We're going a little bit too far off topic. Next up, we had something totally different. We cut to a boxing ring, and we have what is called the Beverly Hills Knockouts. Basically, a worked boxing match with what looked to be bikini models. I don't remember much of Beverly Hills Knockouts. I didn't even know such a thing existed, but it was kind of Glow meets boxing in a really bad way. In this, looking back at it now, it's so sexist and so degrading, and it's hard for me to watch knowing what I know now. We get the match that we have is the Blonde Bomber versus Slaughterhouse Shawn, and it's obviously worked. Wrestling moves are involved. It's just terrible. The less I could talk about this, the less it's going to bring up that bad memory in my head. And, I'm not knocking the women. They were beautiful women, and I'm sure they were models and actresses just trying to catch a break. But it really, really didn't work, and it was really bad. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing worse than what we would see in the bra and panty matches a decade later. But watching this now, it doesn't hold up at all, and it's such of an exploitation of these women, and I just didn't enjoy it. I couldn't enjoy it now without any preconceived notion of it, and I know I lived through the era, so I know that there was this out there. There was Glow, which was kind of a similar thing, but Glow at least took it more and was a little bit more. I don't know how I could say this in the right way. It didn't feel as creepy as this felt. This felt creepy. This felt like guys going to Hooters and tipping the waitress but throwing the $5 bill on the floor so they had to bend over to pick it up, kind of thing. If you get my drift. It just didn't feel right. I'm going to give this a 0. I'm not even going to rate it on my 1 to 5 scale. It was so bad, and it was the one really, really big detractor on the show, in my opinion. Next up, we have a match, and hard to follow that. Next up, we have a match with Paul Diamond and Colonel DeBeers, 2 really good wrestlers, in my opinion. Another guy, Paul Diamond again, who doesn't quite get the love he deserved. I think he was a really good wrestler personally. I think more could have been done with him. I liked his team, his Bad Company team with Pat Tanaka. I think he was a journeyman kind of guy, but I think more could have been done with him. This was the King of the Mountain match where the winner needs to win with being throwing their opponent over the top ropes. Paul Diamond picks up the win surprisingly with a backdrop of Colonel DeBeers over the ropes. And I really liked this match. I thought it was fun. I thought it fit within the guidelines of what they were trying to do. And it was very interesting. A very cool match. One of the few non-jobber matches on the show. Now I'm going to give this match itself a 4. I rather enjoyed it. Next up, we have Sgt Slaughter, the main event of the night, versus the Terminator. Now, there have been a lot of wrestlers that went by the Terminator. This iteration was played by Marcus Laurinaitis, which, if the last name sounds familiar, it's because it should be. He's the brother of Road Warrior Animal and Johnny Ace, or John Laurinaitis. And I knew about him. I hadn't seen much of him. He wrestled mainly in Florida at the time, which I didn't see the Florida product at that time, and Japan. And I think he had a couple little tries here in the AWA, but nothing memorable. He was your basic Road Warrior, bodybuilder, Mad Max ripoff kind of guy. This actually was a pretty good match. Sgt Slaughter is a rather good wrestler. He's a great storyteller when he's in the ring. And I enjoyed this match. I thought it was good. I thought it was fun. I like Slaughter. I've always liked Sgt Slaughter. So to me, this was another shining moment on this show. I'm going to give the match itself a 3. Of course, Sgt Slaughter picks up the win. Like I said, I thought it was really good. Now, some overall thoughts on the show. Some stuff I kind of skipped over. First off, this show was like a weird acid trip. I mean, when they had the wrestlers walking to the ring, they walked, I guess they green screened them, and then they put like this weird hyper-colored tunnel with wrestling fans on either side, kind of like they were walking down the aisle, but it was obvious it wasn't. It looked like wrestling fans in a bar setting or a nightclub setting, and the wrestling fans were sped up, so it was like 1.5 speed, so they're cheering really fastly as the wrestlers are walking out, which was a really weird visual. When they get to the ring itself, the rings looks like in a studio with no crowd around them, but they would cut to this sped up crowd reaction, which was weird. It was kind of surreal and odd, and I know they were trying for something different and something like a music video style, but to me it just didn't fit. And maybe being that this was a pilot, maybe they were going to work that out later, that maybe that was just put in as like a proof of concept kind of thing, that hey, we're going to show the ring, we're going to show the wrestlers coming out of like a tunnel situation with the actual fans on the side, and maybe they just did that as a proof of concept. I don't know why. It was weird and it felt out of place. The Beverly Hills Knockout segment was horrible. The matches and the concept itself I didn't think was bad. It felt like an update of the AWA format. It felt more like what WWE and WCW or Jim Crockett Promotions at the time were doing with their shows. So it felt like they were trying to evolve a bit, which was the biggest negative on the AWA, that they weren't up to the times. And this felt like an 80s wrestling show, or late 80s, early 90s wrestling show. So this felt like what the AWA, the direction they maybe should have went in. Unfortunately, we've seen it didn't last much longer. Overall, this is a very interesting show, and one that I would highly recommend you watching. And I say that before I go into my ratings for the show itself, because I don't want my ratings to dissuade you. Please go and watch this, because even for the curiosity factor, it is such a strange show that I think every wrestling fan should see something like this. See what an experimental concept looks like in a wrestling format. There have not been many. ECW was an experimental concept. Again, it was based off of cutting it like a music video. The matches weren't full matches. They basically were highlights. Music was played. It was different. This was an experiment that didn't take off, but I think it could have worked if they were given a proper opportunity. That being said, we're going to go into our ratings from the show. Now, as I said before, 1 is the worst, 5 being the best. However, we add a little bit of flair for the entire show ratings. 1 is a gobbledygooker, 2 is a Dungeon of Doom, 3 is a Shane Helms, the Hurricane, 4 is a Gold Dust, and 5 is a Kane. I'm going to give this match a 2, a Dungeon of Doom. The one thing that really brings it down is the Beverly Hills Knockouts. If they took that out, I might look at this more favorably. The matches were fast. They were squash matches, which are what we're looking at the time, so I can't really knock that. We had one match with 2 mid to high card talent, and 1 match with a main event talent and a mid carder in the Terminator. Or at least that's how he seemed to be portrayed. So we had 2 basic name matches, which is more than we got on most wrestling shows at the time. So, like I said, I like the concept. I would have liked to see if this was something that came to fruition, what could have happened with it. But, again, it wasn't meant to be. Unfortunately, the AWA folded not too long after this. But with all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been my review. This has been another episode of It Came From the Network, highlighting the AWA Team Challenge Series preview. Or pilot, I'm sorry. I botched that whole thing. I'm going to keep it in there so you guys can see that I botched too. But, again, this is George Coles with an episode of It Came From the Network reviewing the AWA Team Challenge Series pilot.